Is everybody on board, Scott?
I believe so. Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 12 noon on December 3rd, 2020. Thank y'all all for being here. I appreciate it a bunch. Need to do a roll call since the secretary is not here. Pilar, I'll do it. Pilar, if you would signify by saying yes.
I am here, or yes, I'm here.
Nathan Douglas,
President.
Matt Glaves,
Here, yes.
Ed Keenan,
Here.
Jerry Romero,
Here.
Ron Riles,
Here.
Stephanie West is absent, and myself.
No, I'm here. Steph is-
Stephanie, oh, I'm sorry. Courtney Bechtel will not be here, so we do have a quorum. So let's start with the meeting. Let's start off with, are there any invitations for public comment? Kevin, did you get any?
No, I'm sorry, nobody
There are-
registered for public comment.
Okay, perfect. Approval of the minutes for September 18th. I hope everybody had a chance to read it. This is an action item. Shayna, would you mind, after we discuss this, Shayna will be calling for approval. Is there any discussion or changes since everybody's had a chance to look at it? No changes, no discussion?
I think Pilar was saying something, but he's on mute.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to get situated here, Chairman. Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
I
this is
don't
Dave
have
Gordon.
any, I don't have any comments.
Okay. Matt,
Is
did
everyone
you
able
have,
to see their video feed? I'm showing that the video feeds are blacked out for a lot of folks.
some people are just on phone, They aren't
Okay.
their audio.
David, I'm sorry, just to be clear, David, are you referring to board members? Who are you referring to?
I'm showing on my screen that almost all of the video feeds have blacked out, but some of them are coming back intermittently, so I think it's probably on my end.
Madam Chairman, this is Matt Glaves. I will make a motion that we approve the minutes from September 18th.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Ed Keenan. Shayna?
If you are in favor of the motion, say aye. If you're opposed, say nay. Pilar Rodriguez,
Aye.
Nathan Douglas,
Aye.
Matt Glaves,
Aye.
Edward Keenan,
Aye.
Jerry Romero,
Aye.
Rodney Riles,
Aye.
Stephanie Wagner.
Aye.
Madam Chair, 7 board members are in favor of the motion and 0 are opposed.
Motion carries. Thank you, Shayna. Okay, action, item number 4, the fiscal year 2020 annual financial report update. This is an information only item. Wayne, would you please present?
Good morning, Madam Chair and the board. A PDF copy of the AFR was sent to all of the board members, but let me find. And apparently I can't share my screen. But the annual financial report that was due to the comptroller's office on November the 20th was filed on time. And this report is basically used for the state to complete its comprehensive annual financial report, which is the consolidation of all state agencies into one, and it produces the state's financial statements, which are then audited by the state auditor's office. The annual financial report that we are working on now, which will be due December the 18th, is the audited financial report. And the AFR that you have is the starting point for that. And then Rebecca Goldstein, our auditor, our audit manager with Weaver and Tidwell, will be giving you an update on the progress of the audit to date. I mean, are there any questions, comments?
Wayne, I appreciate all the work that you've done, and I know it's just a starting point. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process, and appreciate what you've done so far. Does
Thank you,
anybody
ma'am. I appreciate that.
anybody have any comments or questions for Wayne? Okay. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Action item number 5, the audit financial statement update. This is another information only. This will be presented by Rebecca Goldstein from Weaver, who handles a lot of stuff for us. Rebecca, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. All right, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Yes, and Kevin asked me to join and just kind of give you all an update of where we are on the audit. Like Wayne said, the AFR that's submitted to the comptroller got submitted on the 20th of November. We start our process, try to start our process before that, just to try to get some information requests and get going on the audit. And then our audited financial statements, or your audited financial statements, are due a month after that. So the 20th falls on a weekend this year, so we'll be submitting by the 18th of December. So we are really kind of in the thick of things right now. I would say that we're getting a lot of information requests and processing them right now. We should hopefully be done with test work by mid next week, and then start tying out the report draft that Wayne and his team will provide. And then it needs about another couple days, 3 to 4 days, to go through our internal review process before we can release the audit opinions to be attached to that, the audited financial statements. And so just to give you a little, you know, kind of what the difference is, the AFR to the comptroller has a very standard footnotes and things like that, because it does get consolidated with the statewide report. The standalone financials are a little different. The AFR, the comptroller AFR, is our starting point, but we do, for the standalone financial statements, there are they are comparative financial statements. So we put FY19 and FY20 side by side, so it's a little bit more informative that way. There's also some required footnotes for the pension liability that comes, a lot of the information comes from Rudd and Wisdom. So we got the actual report from Rudd and Wisdom, and then we are waiting on they actually also provide a GASB 67 and 68 disclosures report to us that we can then put that information then goes into the required supplemental information, and also the notes to the audited financial statements. So there's some differences there and some things that are added to the AFR that goes to the comptroller. And then of course, as far as test work, we're kind of in the thick of things. We do a lot of requests. We test the census data that goes to the actuary. We test the sample of distributions to retirees and death benefits, disability benefits, all of that. We look at contributions. We look at a lot, as you can probably ask Wayne and Kevin. So, but we will get through the deadline. And yeah, I mean, right now, as far as findings, there's no findings to report. We're just kind of getting through the information, but nothing to report in terms of anything that doesn't look right. We are working with Wayne and Kevin to get all the information. And so that's all coming in, and we're processing it as quickly as we can. So if there's any particular questions on anything that we do on our side or status, I'll definitely answer any of those.
Rebecca, Jenny here. Are you getting all the information that you need for this in a timely manner from the staff, and all the information, anything that you've asked for that you need, are you getting it?
Yeah, we're getting it. I mean, I will say, I talked to Kevin and a little bit about this earlier today. We still need to fine tune the timing, because we try to get, we send out our what we call a PBC list, prepared by client list, in October. But I know it's hard to, everybody has priorities and things that they're working on. And so it's hard to try to get started that early. So I think we do need to work with Wayne and Kevin going forward on what the best timing of all of that is. But management's been cooperative. We're getting what we need. It's just a matter of, we need to figure out in terms of, because working with Fred and Wisdom, working with management, trying to get the AFR done, we need to figure out when the best time is for us to come in and do our work, so we're not so squeezed during this time period right now. So I think that's going to be a work in progress. But I do want to thank, Kevin and Wayne. I mean, we've had status calls every week. They've been on them, and we're working through everything. It's just, it's a lot of information. So that being said, I do appreciate everybody's, management's time and effort that goes into the audit, because I know it's in addition to everybody's already work responsibilities.
And if I may, Madam Chair, one of the things that, obviously this process is really important to the board, because it's how whether or not we're administering the program, whether or not financially we're taking care of business. Obviously, these sort of things that we're talking about here, for example, they will pull a list of people receiving payments, and we've got to go back and find supporting documentation to confirm that these people are even in the pension system and things like that. Those are things we need to do a better job on. That's independent. And when I say we, it should fall on me. I need to do a better job of segregating that from Wayne's lap, because Wayne's working on the numbers, which we can't do. So really the key here is the pension side, the administrative side. Next year, we've got to do a better job to segregate these responsibilities, because this is really not CFO tasks that some of it that Rebecca's falling on. But also, just so you know, it's, ANCO provides data, we've got information. And also, I think, Rebecca, if you could, what is the process if one of the board members if there's an indication of fraud or something like that, how do they manage that from their perspective? What is it, you're their auditor, how is it what is it you look for or could give them advice on?
Yeah, I mean, we, from a fraud perspective, we're not hired to look for fraud, but part of our due diligence in the audit process is asking management and the board, are you aware of any fraud? Is there any allegations of fraud? And then on a broader scale, are you concerned about any areas of the entity itself, whether it be the distribution side, the contribution side, the investment side, whatever it is? And then we can take that information and do more work in those areas. But other than that, I mean, now if we find something, if there's any indication in what we're doing on the normal course of audit, if we find something that's indicative of fraud, we do go to management right away and we go to the board right away. So that is our responsibility there if we do find anything. And then of course we always, we want to make sure the board feels like they're getting proper communication with management as well. So that's always one of the things that we want to know too, is does the board feel well informed and things like that. So as I said, we're not required to look for fraud, but we ask the questions. And when we see anything that indicates that, we dive deeper and we let you guys know right away. But in terms of, preventative measures, I mean, one of the things we do look at is the controls for all of your major processes, whether it be investments, distributions, contributions. So we look at the controls in place that basically, along with making sure your numbers are right, also help ensure that there's, there's proper segregation of duties, that any type of fraudulent activities are deterred because you have those proper segregation of duties or management reviews or things like that. So that all kind of rolls into it when we look at the control side of it.
Does anybody have any other questions for Rebecca? Having none, Rebecca, thank you so much and appreciate it.
Yeah, I thank you guys, and I'll be looking, I guess, next board meeting that I present is maybe January. Let me know, Kevin, but next time you see me, we'll present the audit results. So, all right, thank you guys. January. Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 6. This will be the actuarial valuation report for the period of August 31st, 2020. Discussion, possible action And I would like to turn this over. I would like Mark Finlaw to speak, sir.
Good afternoon, board members. We have a report that we'd like to touch on some highlights. Hopefully you've had a chance to glance at this report. We met on Tuesday with the actuarial committee and went into some additional detail, more than we'll probably do today, although we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So let's just start with the first page. We perform actuarial evaluations for this system to see if the expected contributions are adequate. So let's just start with the bottom line. Here on the first page of the cover letter, this bold headline says adequate contribution arrangement with expected state contributions and without Part 2 contributions. So that's the good news. So in order to have an adequate contribution arrangement, the guidelines, the pension funding guidelines of the Texas Pension Review Board say that the contributions should be adequate to pay both the normal cost and amortize the unfunded liability over a period of 30 years or less. And we have determined in this report that without appropriations from the state, the system has an inadequate contribution arrangement because the unfunded liability would never be amortized. Let's talk about the expected contributions from the state, and that's addressed in this second paragraph. There are two types of contributions. One is the maximum annual contribution, which is defined in the statute. We'll look at the section in just a minute. It's 1/3 of all contributions to the system by the government bodies. And the second type of contribution from the state is to pay off or to pay part of the administrative expenses. And we're expecting approximately $675,000 each year. And as these contributions come in and are added to the what we call Part 1 contributions, these are the regular monthly contributions from the governing bodies of the participating departments. We expect that altogether, there can be a 30-year amortization period after the normal cost is paid with the Part 1 contributions, and up to 19 years of the maximum state contribution is needed. So the bottom line is an adequate contribution arrangement and no need for the Part 2 contributions, which are sort of a backstop or a safety net if we would need the state maximum contributions for more than 30 years, then we would determine an additional contribution that departments would have to pay that would be a percentage of their Part 1 contributions. But in this actual evaluation, we determined there's no need for that. On page 2, we show key provisions of the state law regarding state contributions. The first one that's in here is a definition of actuarially sound pension system. And it's been in there a long time, but it's consistent now with the Pension Review Board guidelines for pension funding, saying that contributions, if they're adequate or sufficient to pay the normal cost and amortize the unfunded liability in a period that does not exceed 30 years, then and the phrase that's used here is actuarially sound pension system. That used to be a more popular phrase, and when it's defined like it is here, it's you know what you're talking about. But the phrase that we often use is adequate contribution arrangement, but they're synonymous phrases. The second section here is the one that defines what we call the maximum annual state contribution. It's 1/3 of the total contributions in a year made by the participating departments. And then this third section talks about the board adopts a benefit formula for determining monthly benefits, and it's done assuming that the maximum state contributions are provided so that the system is maintained as actuarially sound. So Our interpretation of these three sections is that the state law calls for the state to contribute the maximum amount to the system each year as is necessary for the system to have an adequate contribution arrangement, an amortization period that does not exceed 30 years. So let's look at page 3 and talk, what happened here? Seem to have lost my PDF, or it's been distorted. Let me stop sharing and see if I can find a different document that's not distorted.
Jenny, if you don't mind, while he's talking, Mark just made that point about the 30-year funding, about the provision in our law. One of the things that you're going to see is the State Pension Review Board is looking to pension funds to have a plan to get to full funding, and are trying to promote the concept of funding periods less than 25 years. But when it comes to our system, we define actuarial soundness, what he just pointed out, which is the state. I see your back, Mark. I will shut up and let you go back to work.
There's a paragraph here on page 3 that talks about the actuarial assumptions. And I want to remind the board and for anyone who's watching or listening in, we review the actuarial assumptions for every valuation, but we did a deeper dive this time doing an experience study for the 6 plan years ending August 31, 2018. We put together a report of our experience study and review of all the assumptions in a report dated July 23rd. That was presented to the board prior to your August 18th meeting. And at that meeting, we presented our recommendations and the board adopted all the actual assumptions that we recommended. The key changes were a reduction in the investment return assumption from 7.75 to 7.5, an increase in the assumed termination rates, an increase in the assumed average age at which vested terminated members will begin their retirement benefit, and a change to a new published mortality table developed especially for public plan employees or public employees, although we think it's appropriate for a public system of volunteers as well. And it's projected for mortality improvement with a more sophisticated method. So we believe that the system now has a more appropriate set of assumptions than before, and we believe that they're reasonable for the system for the long-term future. So let's go to page 7 and look at some details here, and we'll just walk you through some of the most important. It's the bottom half of page 7 that's really the most important. The top half, well, there's some building blocks there, numbers, and then in this section we say without state appropriations, the amortization period is infinity, so that means an inadequate contribution arrangement. The bottom half of the page looks at what the system looks like with the expected appropriations from the state. So item 12 is the first type of state appropriation. These are to pay part of the system administrative expenses. And you can see that in the valuation 2 years ago, we assumed that the appropriation would be approximately $725,000 a year. It's requested as a part of the legislative appropriation request, LAR, and the reason that this went down is because of the governor's requirement that each state agency reduce their expenses by 5% a year. And so this was close to what was included in the LAR for the next biennium. So we assumed that amount each year going forward. And it's something that, as you can see in 12B, we do need this every year, because to the extent that there are administrative expenses that are not paid by the $675,000, Those expenses are anticipated and added to the normal cost contributions in item 11A. So that's where the rest of the administrative expenses are recognized. And then item 14 are that's the appropriations from the state for the amortization of the unfunded liability, or what we call the maximum annual state contribution. The amounts that we expect, we show on two different pages. Page 9 showed from the valuation 2 years ago, page 10 this time. We won't go there, but the bottom line is that we're expecting $100,000 less per year. And there's a couple of reasons. One is the short term, what's in the LAR, and then in the long term, we projected a smaller increase in new departments than we had 2 years ago. That was one of the differences. Fewer departments buying back service, prior service credits, making additional contributions to create credit for service before a department enters the system. So we have $150,000 less really projected to come from the state in this valuation than 2 years ago. Item, let's see, 14B, this is in a sense, it's the shortfall. In other words, it's after we've taken into consideration the $675,000 for the state, then we have a little over on line 11B, a little over $1 million left a year to pay off the unfunded liability. The present value of that is compared to the unfunded liability, and then this is the deficit or the shortfall that we look to the maximum annual state contributions to make up. And so we determine a present value of those state appropriations or expected appropriations year by year until it equals the needed amount. And in this valuation, it will require 19 years of those projected appropriations from the state, so that together with the Part 1 contributions and the $675,000 a year for administrative expenses, the amortization period is in the bold print, the bold heading, would be 30 years. So, and then line 15 just emphasizes that there is no need for Part 2 contributions. We've got a page set up to handle the demonstration of how that's determined if it's necessary, but it's not necessary in this valuation. It wasn't necessary 2 years ago. And then this bottom line shows the funded ratio. That's a very common metric that people like to look at. It really got its highlight from the accounting profession when they started requiring that a series of years of that be disclosed back with GASB 25 and 27 in the late 1990s. And it's become a more popular metric. We think that it's not a standalone metric. You need to know the amortization period. You need to know if contributions are adequate to pay the normal cost and to pay off the unfunded liability in a reasonable period. But this level indicates a healthy system, that the dollars compared to the actuarial accrued liability is at a good level. And that means that the key to the future of this system will be the investment experience, because to the extent that the system earns more than 7.5% per year, that will make that funded ratio move toward 100% faster. If the system earns less than 7.5%, that will slow down that expected progression. But we do use a smoothing method to dampen market volatility. But I think it would be good to look at the recent investment experience on page 15. And also this shows you our worksheet, if you will, for determining the actual value of assets. We look at the method for adjusting the market value of assets looks at the investment gains or losses and we recognize them 20% per year. So let's just look at the year that ended August 31, 2020. So we calculate what the expected dollars of investment return would have been if the system had earned the assumed 7 3/4. And this, remember, we didn't change to 7.5 until going forward, September 1, 2020. So it was 7 3/4. We expected $8.8 million. So the expected market value was 121.8. The actual market value was 125.2. So there was a $3.4 million investment gain. And we recognized 20% of that in the actuarial value of assets, and we deferred 80%, as you can see in this line here. And so we have now recognized 40% of the loss that occurred in the prior year. There was a $7.7 million loss, and we're deferring 60%. And so you can see 80, 60, 40, 20. So the years ending in 15 and earlier, we fully recognize their experience. And so you can see the rates of return at 3 out of the 4 years, very good, above 10%. That's good. But look, of the 1%, you may think, well, that's not that bad. It's still positive. But look at the dollars of the gains or losses. $3.4 million gain, $3.2 million gain, $2.4 million gain, but a $7.7 million loss. So you have to remember that the bar for measuring the gain or loss was 7.75%. So this was a bigger loss than any of these gains. So that's why I think, downside protection is an important thing. That's one reason you have a significant amount of your investments in other than equities to dampen the market volatility. So the next page just shows a comparison of the market value of assets, the red box, the red squares connected by the red lines, and the smooth or actuarial value of assets, the green circles and the green lines. It's been unusually tight fit, those two, in the last two actuarial valuations. I think the prior two valuations in 14 and 16 were more typical of what we see, where there's maybe 2 years of a good market run up and we don't recognize all that good gain. And so the actuarial value is less than the market value. Or if there've been a couple of years where the market didn't perform very well, then the actuarial value of assets will be above. But this dampens market volatility. So we're taking a long-term look. The accountants look at it on a year-to-year basis. So the disclosures that will be put in your annual report will be based on market value, or what's now called the net fiduciary position. And so the funded ratios can be a little bit different in those disclosures. So I've touched on the highlights, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
I just have a comment for everybody. It is so important that we understand that we've got to get this $675,000 from the state, and the 1/3 contribution. All of these contributions that we're getting from the state is what's going to make our actuarial assumptions work. And what a lot of people don't understand is most pension systems, you've got an employer putting money in, you've got the employee putting in, and then you have your investments that help your pension system grow. Our employer is the state, because the employee is the state, because we have the funds coming in from the municipalities. We've got our investments coming in, but the firefighters themselves do not put money in, and the state is what is covering that third leg of this whole investment. Am I correct on this, Mark?
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
It sums it down. So we have got, that's why it's important for us to do this smoothing method. And the impact dropping from 7 3/4 to 7.5 was it a significant impact on the assumptions, or was it, what kind of an impact did the dropping it from a 7.75 to 7.5?
Well, the increase was about 3% of an increase for a retiree, a pensioner, a retiree or surviving spouse. Their liability went up by about 3% on average with that reduction. But the change in the termination rates that applies to the actives, that more than offset the increasing effect of the lower investment return assumption. So the combination, and also the change in the assumed average age at which vested terminated participants would begin their benefit increasing by 2 years also had a reducing effect. So there were two things that reduced the liability that more than offset the increasing effect of the reducing of the investment return assumption.
And I think that if we had only made the one change to the investment return and no other assumption changes, then it would probably be infinity and you'd need part two. And if you had isolated only making the mortality change, no other change, it very well would have been the same situation. You would need part two. And thankfully, it was the other assumptions, like Mark said, the changing in the termination and the deferral age, the other things that were able to offset that.
Does anybody have any questions for Mark? Matt, do you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Jerry? Nathan? Rod?
No questions for me. Thank you all very much though for it. And it definitely is good where you pushed it out, Mark, as far as a good explanation of it, because I know there's a lot of mystery in the actuary portion of this.
Pilar?
No, Madam Chair.
Stephanie? Ed?
Mark, you made one comment about pushing it out 2 years. You're not saying we went from 55 to 57, correct?
Well, we went from 56 to 58, actually.
Yeah.
Now it's sort of a stumper. They can start receiving their benefit at age 55, but for whatever reason, a number of the vested terminated participants don't apply for that benefit immediately. And the system will contact them and eventually they will apply. So we looked at the experience in the 6 years. We also looked at the ones that were vested terminated as of August 31, 2018. That was the end of our 6-year period, and looked at how many were at the ages that they currently had. And even if they'd started it right then, they were still, the average was a little bit above 58. So we think it's a reasonable assumption going forward.
Okay, I misunderstood you there. I understand exactly what you're talking about now. So I'm good.
It is significant. And if the tide shifts and everybody starts receiving their benefit as soon as they can at age 55, then the liability significantly increases, and then you'd have ramifications for that. So, and the benefit's not retroactive. They don't apply for it at 58 and get retroactive back to 55. They're just missing out on those payments. So we just have to keep seeing if that's what the pattern of what people are actually doing continues.
That is the pattern in our department. I can't explain it. These guys are 2 or 3 years late. Don't get it, but hey.
If I may.
Because some of the benefits are small, and so it just doesn't rise up to their priority of getting the paperwork done. Who knows?
Well, some of our retirements are pretty nice.
Yeah.
If I may, part of it also is a reflection on, if you're a career employee with the municipality, you leave that organization, or say you work there 10 years or more, you leave that organization knowing, hey, when I get age, I got a pension coming. and you follow through. There's a lot of the, a lot of the people we're talking about maybe owed a $23 a month pension. They didn't even, and they left the department in the 80s or 90s. They were 45 years old or whatever, or 35, whatever, and they're not even aware of it. And the problem we have is twofold, is that they don't keep up with us, and then we have to go try to find them. And you would think it would be easier to find people, but it really isn't that easy. And so I will say that I am, the thing for us all to remember is that these benefits belong to those members. We have an obligation to get them on the payroll. And so we're going to continue to try to do a better job. And if Mark's assumption is upside down because of it, so be it. But we'll have to deal with that then.
Okay. Any other discussion? This is Pilar's committee, and Ed Keenan is on that committee as well. Pilar, can I get a motion or to accept this evaluation?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that we accept the 2020 actuarial evaluation as presented by Rudd and Wisdom.
Can I get a second, please?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Having none, Shayna, would you call roll, please?
Pilar Rodriguez,
Aye.
Nathan Douglas,
Aye.
Matt Glaves,
Aye.
Edward Keenan,
Aye.
Jerry Romero,
Did you hear me?
oh, no, sir.
Aye.
Got it. Rodney Riles,
Aye.
Stephanie Wagner.
Aye.
Madam Chair, 7 board members are in favor of the motion and 0 are opposed.
Thank you. Motion carries. Item agenda number 7 was part 2 contribution rate for participating departments. Discussion, I think after listening to the actuarial evaluation from Rudd and Wisdom, that since we're not going to need it, I think this item is no longer needed. So there will be no action on this item as I see it. Anybody have any concerns or discussion going forward on this issue?
So just to be clear, new board members, so in the past, we've had a situation where after the state contribution was made and everything else was taken into consideration, that there wasn't enough money coming into the fund to get to a 30-year funding. That's when you go to the local departments and say, you've got to pay the difference. You are capped at 15%. So in other words, the amount of their contributions could never exceed, under your rules, 15%. So if later on we get to the point where you do need to look at it, just remember that's the purpose of it. Now, that's not to say that at some point down the road, you may not, in 2 years, you'll look at it again. But for right now, for the next 2 years, we will not assess a part 2 contribution rate.
Look at it once every 2 years, correct?
Correct. Okay. Any further discussion? Let's move on to agenda item number 8, request for future agenda item meetings and dates. The next board meeting will be December 8th at 9 o'clock. And Pilar came up with this idea, and because of COVID, we are going to have to meet by Zoom until. So the proposal is to possibly meet one Thursday a month, the third Thursday. If needed, we can do it, but if we could go ahead and schedule this, think about it going forward. This is just a discussion. Third Thursday of every month until we can meet in person. Once we are able to meet in person, the third Thursday will no longer hold weight. So this is something to consider and think about. Kevin, you want to talk about the schedule? We are going to have a busy year. We have a lot of things to do, and I think these 1 hour meetings, short burst, help us out a lot better. We can still move on. Kevin?
Sure. So basically, and I'm going to send this out in the next week, but if you think about the coming year, so for example, next week, December 8th will be the investment performance report of September 31st. So you're going to concentrate on the investment report. John Breath will give you that. One of the items we're going to introduce at the December 8th meeting is the concept of a consent agenda, consent calendar, if you would, where basically we're going to group a lot of the items that in the past have been separate agenda items. For example, say we need authority to issue an RFP that's pretty routine. My staff report, budget reports, things like that, that we give to you as a separate action items. But what we're proposing is at the next meeting, these sort of routine items would be under a consent agenda. And that if you don't have any objection, we could take care of all of it in one motion. But let's say, for example, there's an item in the consent agenda you want to take out and discuss separately and have separate action, we could do so. But the idea is for much of the items that non-root, sort of bureaucratic, if you would, non-controversial, that we could consolidate that. There would still be supporting documentation in your report. But the idea is that instead of going through the process when we've got an hour, so this meeting's gone 47 minutes, which is pretty good, but all of us are staying on these meetings more than an hour and 15 minutes is too much. So the idea is, and we'll see how that works next time. So we're going to introduce the consent agenda. January, you need to get an auditor's report and you need to get a report from your cybersecurity consultant. The cybersecurity meeting will be in closed session. So, and the auditor's report, Rebecca Goldstein will be reporting on the audited financial statements. So that'll be January. One of the things that we're going to do after this meeting, now that we have the actuarial evaluation, we are issuing the RFP for a firm to audit Rudd & Wisdom's actuarial evaluation that they just presented. And the idea is that in February, the board will interview candidates to give that contract to. In March, you're going to be looking at the investment performance report as of December 31st. In April, you're going to have that actuarial audit, the results of that actuarial audit of Mark Finlaw's work and Rudd & Wisdom's work will be presented to you. Now, at that same time, one of the things, Rudd & Wisdom's contract expires next August 31st. So we need to issue an RFP for actuarial firms to bid on that account. So the idea is that the audit of this actuarial valuation will be available, and so that firms wishing to bid on the account can see a third-party review of the latest valuation, and you will also have it as part of your due diligence. So that will be in April. In May, and in May, we're going to have the investment performance report for the first quarter of 21. During the summer, right now we have nothing set in June, but during the summer, you're obviously going to need to interview and actuarial firms and make an award to the contract. And then of August, it will be the year-end wrap-up and also the investment performance report for the second quarter of 21. So basically, I think one of the good things is, first of all, let's hope that we can go back to meeting. But I think one of the positive things about all of this is that I'm hoping that going forward, that quarterly you continue to meet in person, and that when we have these other items that we have from 2 or 3 times a year, some years more than others. Instead of having to drive or fly to Austin, we can do a Zoom and take care of that. But I think one thing we have to remember is the authority to act on a Zoom meeting is subject to the governor's emergency call, the designation that he's made due to COVID. That's how we're operating due to the authority provided there. It's my understanding that as soon as he decides he suspends the emergency action, our ability to meet like this would no longer take place. We would have to have a quorum in place in a physical location, and the other members log on through Zoom. But I anticipate that the legislature, is in part of its reviews of the governor's emergency powers, will look at the Open Meetings Act, because I see this is not going away. This is very functional. So I expect to see the legislature make changes to it. So even in the absence of emergency action, that you will have the authority to act, to take these kinds of actions. So basically, I think Pilar's suggestion of having a bookmarking a day every month for the next 8 months is good and can help you balance, and then also enable us to take care of a lot of things in a short amount of time. So thank you very much, and also I want to thank Mark and Rebecca for their presentation. They do a great job for us. I thought Mark's maybe I paid more attention to this one than all the other ones, since I had it in the screen and I was following his document. So maybe it's on me, but I thought you did a good job, and maybe you should never present in person anymore. Maybe this is your deal. So that's the agenda items that have going forward.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Any questions or comments from anyone?
Madam
Okay.
Chairman, this
Yes.
is Matt Glaves. I do have a question, just since Kevin just laid it out. So specifically to us, if we waited till the third week in January, the third Thursday, that would be the 21st. Is that still going to be on a timeline that's acceptable for what you need to accomplish in January?
Let me, if you don't mind, Madam Chair, let me give everybody the proposed dates. And to answer your question is yes. So for example, we've got the December 8th meeting date. January 21st would be the auditor's report and cybersecurity. I'm sorry, January 21st. February 18th would be the interview of actuarial audit firms. March 18th would be the investment report for December of 2020. April 15th would be the actual audit presentation. May 20th would be the investment performance report for March 31st of 21. June 17th is currently reserved. I don't know what, so that would just be that third Thursday, but there's nothing that I know has to take place. July 22nd would have to be the latest to interview actuarial firms and to award a contract so that you could have a contract, an actuarial contract in effect by September 1st. And then August 19th would be the investment performance report for June 30th, and also any year-end things. So we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out, because there's sort of a domino in some of these. You got to issue the RFP, you got to do all the documents there, you got to bring it to the board, you got to negotiate a contract. And then once you get that, you got to get it, in the case of the audit, you got to get the audit done and delivered. So Matt, I hope that answered your question.
It does. Thank you.
And I will send this out once, I will send this out in an email between now and the meeting next week, so that you can get an idea of what we're looking at.
Anyone else? I think this was a really good meeting, y'all. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
This is Matt Glaves. So move.
I'll
Can I get-
second that.
Ed seconds. Got a motion by Matt Glaves, second by Ed Keenan. All those in favor say aye.
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 David said we could do that. All right, y'all. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you guys next Thursday,
Okay.
9 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, take care.